Hey, everybody out there. Once again, Bryant Thomas of AP News Bureau in Washington, D.C. of late. And today's topic is Social Security, which Bryant Thomas has been following assiduously for a number of years now. And since we're both in our senior years, it'll
Yeah.
do. What's going on now in terms of the debate over possible cuts? Now, according to Kevin McCarthy, he's reportedly agreed to leave cuts at Social Security and Medicare off the table as the debt ceiling negotiations continue. Do you believe it?
Well, I think he's got no choice. He knows that with all of the flack he's getting for the MAGA people that are getting key positions in the Congress, the last thing he needs to do is stir up the seniors. So that's predictable.
Okay, well, I mean, he's saying that he was never considering them anyway. Those reports were false, and even President Trump has chimed in saying, "Leave Social Security and Medicare alone. There's no reason to cut those. People deserve it. They put it into it all their working lives, so therefore, hands off." So you think this is just posturing, and they're going to sneak around another way, make an end run around, and actually cut Social Security or Medicare benefits? Do you think that's actually possible?
Well, I think they're going to tinker with who gets what at what time and change the formula by which COLA is applied to future increases for those already getting Social Security.
Oh,
Um,
cost of living increases.
right. So I think, the whole thing um, is predicated on the fact that the Republicans and their supporters in business, and especially in big business, who have to match the Social Security deductions that are taken from everybody's paycheck every week or every 2 weeks. That's the rub. It's always been the rub. It'll always be the rub. If the match were not part of this equation, you wouldn't hear a peep from the Republicans about Social Security. They wouldn't care. They didn't have any stake in it, but they do.
All right. So, I mean, for years you've been saying the Republicans are going to do it one way or another. So you're saying now that even though they're giving the lip service to no cuts, they're going to find a way around it. Now, how would that be done? And how would that be feasible politically for either party? Because don't forget, the Republican base now is largely senior citizens and conservative people that don't want those cuts to be made. So how would they do it? How would they sneak it in?
Well, the question is whether they listen to their constituents or they listen to the lobbyists. Big business wants no part of paying more money in matching funds to people's accounts under Social Security. They've made that abundantly clear over the years. So I think that if McCarthy suddenly realizes that this is still the third rail of American politics, that he's got to approach this gingerly. And just because you say, well, we have to make cuts because the fund is going to go broke and we're not going to have enough money to pay people in the future. Well, along comes Joe Manchin this week and says, I want to remove the earnings cap altogether. Right now it's at 140,000 or whatever, something figure like that. He wants to take it off altogether.
Okay, now that would appear to be a simple and fair solution. Raise the cap so that the rich people pay more. Which after what what's the cap now?
140 something $1,000 or whatever it
Okay,
is.
so a rich guy making well over $140,000 doesn't pay any more after he reaches that earning, which in some cases is within months of their year. So
That's correct.
so therefore, what's wrong with that?
Because their employers also stop paying when they reach that cap. So say if somebody makes $1 million a year, they get to that cap. It's say in January, late January, early February, they got 10 and a half months of not paying anything into that fund.
But what I'm saying is, what's wrong with raising that cap so both the earner and the employer have to pay more beyond?
Well, what I'm saying is this, that there can be little doubt that something has to be done to shore up the fund. The fund is going to get in serious trouble by 2035. The actuaries have told us that repeatedly. What has not happened is that Congress has not taken a definitive, courageous action to fix the problem. They've kicked the can down the road for years on end, and now it's getting close. And I think, here's my take on the Manchin thing. Manchin wants to go down in history as the guy that saved Social Security. And he puts this trial balloon out. Well, let's remove the earnings cap altogether. And by the way, most economists believe that if they did that alone, it would solve all of Social Security's problems. So they don't have to do anything else except raise the cap, the income cap.
So it sounds like Manchin's on the right track then.
Well, he's on the right track for this if Biden goes along with it and the Democrats in the Senate go along with it.
And why would
And they get enough Republicans in the House to go along with it. That's the wrinkle right there.
All right, so what you're saying is raising the cap so the rich pay more, it'll pass the Senate among both Democrats and Republicans in the Senate.
Well, I think they only need 50 votes. They don't need the Republicans.
Okay. So the Democrats will pass it in the House.
Correct. In the Senate.
Okay, then it goes to the House. What happens there?
A good question. Many of the moderate Republicans understand the need to fix this. McCarthy and his gang want no part of this. I can guarantee you that. And if this thing comes over there, you'll see him quickly change the position that he took this week about leaving Social Security and Medicare off the table in the budget talks. And
so you're saying House Speaker McCarthy won't go along with raising the cap so the rich pay more into Social.
Oh no, I can never see that happening.
So how is he going to finesse this so it's publicly and politically acceptable?
Well, the thing is whether enough moderate Republicans will defy McCarthy and vote for the bill. They don't need very many votes. You know, they only have a 6 or 7 vote plurality in the House. So, you know, it's they don't need that much to make this work.
All right. Now McCarthy is saying, Kevin McCarthy, the new House Speaker, you know, talking about reform and all that, he is saying publicly that he is not going to touch Social Security or Medicare. So you're saying
that's with the debate on raising the debt ceiling. It has nothing to do with Manchin's advancement of this bill to remove the cap. They're not related yet.
All right, but if the cap is proposed as a way to save Social Security, you're saying McCarthy is going to oppose it.
I can guarantee you he'll switch positions.
So he'll oppose that as a solution, and then he'll say that we should open up the possibility of cutting Social Security and Medicare.
Well, I don't know if he'll go that far, but he will oppose raising the cap or removing the cap. Who knows what, you know, hot dogs and laws, you don't want to see either one of them made, you know, and I think this is an example of that.
All right, you know, for the viewers that may not be abreast of all this in the history of Social Security and the cap, Social Security came about after FDR got in. It was coming out of the Depression. He was trying to get things back on track economically. And, you know, he pushed for Social Security as a way to ensure the security of seniors after they retire. So they wouldn't be facing economic ruin and going to the poorhouse if poorhouses were still around at the time. So the original cap, let's explain the earnings cap. The way it is, it's set up after you earn a certain amount of money, you don't no longer pay into Social Security, and the employer doesn't have to do the same. What was the original cap, and what is it now?
Well, it started in 1937 in January. Even though FDR signed the bill in 35, Social Security taxes were not deducted until the 1st of January 1937. There was an income cap at that time of $3,000 annually, and that was an enormous amount of money for anyone to make in 1937.
So
still in the Depression, and that cap was virtually applicable to 95% of the public in this
So
country.
back then in 1937, if you made more than $3,000 a year, you wouldn't have to pay any more into Social Security. But you
Right,
said
it would
5%
cease for the rest of that calendar year. That's
okay,
correct.
and 95% of people that were working or employed in some way would not exceed that cap.
That's right.
All right.
So they leave this alone until 1951,
Uh-huh.
and they raised the threshold at that point to $3,600, which is still modest because we had gone through World War II and the baby boom after that and the economic expansion that took place after World War II. So leaving it at $3,600 was still modest, but there were so many people working in this country at that point. There was something like a 100-to-1 ratio between those working and those collecting Social Security. So the fund was growing by millions and billions of dollars.
So they didn't have to raise it, even though I don't think in 51 it was still 95% of the workers that were earning less than that cap. Correct?
Well, that's right. They had begun to earn more after World War II because we finally got out of the Depression and corporations started making more money and salaries started to rise. So this whole thing then gets going again, and there were some ad hoc increases set by Congress. I'm reading on another screen here, and the bump to $4,200 a year from $3,600 occurred in 1955, and then they bumped it again to $4,800 in 1959, to $6,600 in 1966, and I remember that because that's the first year that I made enough money to have it stop. And then in 1968, it went to $7,800, and it's gone up progressively ever since then.
And now it's what?
Now it's way up to somewhere near $140,000 a year for 2023.
Okay, I mean,
it could even be more. I haven't looked at the latest figure.
So what is it now again?
I don't know exactly the figure. Let me look it up while we continue to speak. But I think the whole thing with this is whether the argument can be made that eliminating the cap altogether is politically possible.
But it wouldn't fix.
But it would fix the problem instantly.
Yeah.
So, Social Security earnings cap. Let's see what it is now, and this will come right from the Social Security website. $160,000 this year. It was $147,000 last year. So I was right.
Okay, I mean, $160,000 is paltry for a lot of people today. I mean, there's tons and tons of people making more than $160,000.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
So removing the cap would open up a floodgate of funds into the Social Security Trust Fund. Now, keep in mind that by law, the Social Security Administration has to invest money. It just can't sit on this trust fund and do nothing with it. So they sell bonds, and the government, for instance, pays, I think the last figure was $83 billion back to the Social Security Trust Fund in terms of interest on the bonds that the Social Security Administration is required to sell. So to argue that the government has not funded Social Security is specious. It's not true. They have to by law. So unless somebody changes that rule, and that's not likely because it's part of Social Security's mantra, that's not going to change. But the shortfall is going to occur because fewer people are working and paying into the system. So the trust fund is going to see its aggregate amount be reduced. And when it gets to the point where it doesn't take in as much money as it's paying out, that's when we get into trouble.
Yeah,
Manchin is looking to stave this off, to his credit.
in fact, the projections are in as early as 2032 or 3, Social Security will go bust unless something changes.
Well, that's right, and Manchin knows that. Here's the other thing I think about Manchin. He wants to go down in history as the man who saved Social Security. Whether Biden and the Democrats give him that opportunity, it remains to be seen. But if they do, my prediction is that Joe Manchin is going to retire from the Senate. And this is his prelude to that retirement. So he can go out with a bang, and the Republicans can have the seat ad infinitum.
All right, but Brian, unless I'm misinterpreting what you're saying when it gets to the House, if it gets to the House,
Right.
it passes the Senate, you're saying that since the Democrats are in control, they'll go along with this, that they will support it in spades. Yeah, let's raise the cap. You're saying the problem will be when it gets to the House, and that the Republicans and McCarthy will not go along with this. But
I don't think they will, as far as the total repeal of the cap is concerned. Now, this thing is going to go to a conference committee, obviously, and that's where the rubber will meet the road here. And if it comes out of conference committee largely intact, then you're going to see McCarthy start to wiggle on this.
All right, but Brian, I would say this. My perception is now, the political landscape now has changed since the early days when the Republicans were adamantly for big business and special interests. The Democrats are for the working class. That's all merged together now. And I see the Democrats are just as beholden to special interests, rich interests, as the Republicans have traditionally been. So if it gets to the House, will it really be just the Republicans resisting that? Won't the Democrats in the House feel also the pressure not to raise the cap because they are also beholden to special interests and the moneyed interests, the big moneyed interests? Is that not the political reality today?
I'd have to see that actually take place. If it does, then voters are going to have another good reason to get rid of a lot of lawmakers, both parties. So I'm not so sure that will happen. I think that Hakeem Jeffries is going to be able to do things very quietly that Nancy Pelosi could not do, simply because she was such a lightning rod for the Republicans. Jeffries is not in that category, and he's been able to do things even yet that Nancy Pelosi probably would have had trouble doing. So I don't think that it's going to be the piece of hemlock that you think.
I'm not so sure about Jeffries being more conciliatory and able to bring both parties to compromise positions, considering the speech he made when he was handing the gavel to McCarthy. I mean, it wasn't a very conciliatory speech. If anything, he went off on a political tangent that the Republicans were the devil incarnate. So considering the tone of his speech, I'm not so sure if he's going to be able to come to the compromises that you're suggesting.
Well, that remains to be seen. I think that there's a difference between posturing on a political stage, which is what they were all doing that day, and actually getting down to what the American people sent these lawmakers to Washington to do in the first place. And that was the people's business. This is the people's business, everybody's business. And both parties, I think, are going to have to understand that something has to be done to shore up this system.
All right, so wrapping it up now, you are predicting that if it passes the Senate, which you think it will.
I think so.
Okay, then it goes to the House. And again, summing up, what do you think is going to happen there?
Well, I think the conference committee's in what's in the middle. So a group of lawmakers from both the Senate and the House will sit down and try to hammer it out so that they can get some sort of consensus on the bill that will then be transferred to the House. Then the House will have to manipulate it and see if they can pass it. And then it has to go back to the Senate with any changes that are done at that point. So
all right, but it's
an egregious process, but that's what will happen.
All right, but in the House, before it goes back to the Senate, in the House, they're going to come up with a compromise on raising the cap or some other devices without even considering raising the cap.
Probably. You never know. I mean, I don't know. You'll have to see with the reaction by House Republicans to what Manchin has proposed.
All right.
If Biden embraces this and the Democrats in the House and the Senate embrace it, then they're going to be scampering in the Republican Party to find alternatives.
All right. So you're saying that when it gets to the House, they may not necessarily stick with the fix of raising the cap. They may find other fixes, or will it be a combination?
Probably a combination, and anything that puts substantial revenue into the Social Security Trust Fund could be politically viable. It doesn't have to be the all or nothing tax cap removal. It doesn't have to be that extreme. But if they don't do that, then they're going to have to pick up the revenue somewhere else,
Right.
or revisit the issue if they don't do it all this time.
All right, and raising the cap, once again, I'll say that both parties, Democrats and Republicans now, Democrats as well as Republicans, are beholden to the big money interests. So both of them might have a stake in not raising the cap that high.
I don't see that. I think that's political suicide. I think if they didn't get the message that voters were annoyed with the Republican Party back in November of 2022, then they're really slow learners.
So therefore, you're saying, what about the cap in terms of both parties in the House?
Well, all I'm saying is that voters gave, the people in Washington a clear message in November last, and that was to start doing the people's business. They don't want to have another 2 years of constant political bickering and one-upsmanship while the people's business languishes. That's all I'm saying.
So you're predicting that when it gets to the House, the Democrats are not going to resist raising the cap considerably higher.
No, I think they'll go along with most of it. Yeah.
Okay. And before we close, let's reiterate one of your favorite themes, which I agree with, that Social Security is not an entitlement.
No, it's not. And that's the big thing. If you take a look at Social Security and Medicare, they are paid for every time someone gets a paycheck. Half from your deduction of your pay and half from a match from your employer.
Right.
That's not an entitlement program. That's a funded program every week by workers and their employers. Medicaid, which is a program that provides health care for the poor, is an entitlement program. That's 100% paid for by the government.
Medicaid to be distinguished from Medicare, which is not
correct. But Rush Limbaugh was very successful in getting them all lumped together, saying these are all entitlement programs. Okay, it's BS. It's not true.
Once again, I agree with you that Limbaugh and other Republicans pushed that term entitlement, which became the nomenclature. However, what we disagree on is the Democrats' role in not resisting that title, entitlement. They didn't say, hey, it's not an entitlement. They went along with it. Why?
That's a good question. I think they went along because they didn't think people would actually start to believe it.
Well, they have really,
and Goebbels should have taught them that all you got to do is say it long enough and often enough, and people will believe it.
If they didn't realize right away that once they inserted it as an entitlement, that it wouldn't be politically advantageous for the Republicans. If they didn't realize that, they're either part of the compromise, or they're stupid. I mean, there's no two ways around it. Why wouldn't they realize right away that if they didn't challenge the nomenclature of entitlement, that it was going to take legs and really become the dominant brainwashing technique of of people that are opposed to Social Security and Medicare? I mean, why wouldn't they realize that? I don't.
Again, I don't think they thought it would take root. That's what I think.
But,
and when it started to, it was like a snowball going downhill. It was very hard to stop.
But they never objected to it strongly.
Oh no. There were lawmakers I talked to when I was at the AP prior to 2006 when I retired, who were complaining about this lumping together of all these programs at that point. Now, they did not have a majority of Democrats who were saying all of that, but there were lawmakers who were onto it.
Those lawmakers and others should have been harping on that every time they were interviewed, that it's not.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
You know, it was the fact that they failed to do that. It's their own fault that it took root. And what the hell is wrong with the Democrats not realizing early on the damage it would do, this propaganda handle that it's an entitlement? You know, what was wrong with them not resisting it strongly and consistently right from the beginning and ever since?
Well, I think there's some accuracy to that statement. My thing is that the brainwashing has worked. I told you about both my son and my daughter, who still believe, or my son has passed, but my daughter still believes that she won't see Social Security. Now, she's in her mid-50s.
Yeah.
She's not that far away from collecting. And she still believes that it's not going to be there when she retires. And I think that's very tragic that they have poisoned the minds of all these young workers into believing that this is something just for the older people who were, collecting now, and that they'll have to come up with retirement plans on their own and not rely on the government.
Yeah, old codgers on the dole with entitlements, right?
Yeah.
All right, Bryant Thomas, a long career in radio news, most lately with the AP News Bureau in Washington, D.C., where all the action was. Bryant, thanks once again for joining us.
You bet.